My ex-housemate was potentially a serial killer. This is a convoluted story, so bear with me as I try to convey everything I can recall about what led me to the conclusion that my ex-housemate could have potentially been a serial killer, or a serial killer in the making. It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances my housemate and landlord Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was odd, but I really needed a place to stay and, well, people have their little quirks, so I just chalked it up to that at the time. As I got to know Mike and our cohabitation continued, I learned more about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, that he used meth. Now, I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He was probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job, enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that when he would be around the house drinking and using meth, he would start to run off at the mouth. He would often joke that if I smelled lye coming from the basement, not to think anything of it. I think it was probably the third time he said this that I asked why he keeps saying that, and he said, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with a wily grin on his face. I tried to chalk that up to a bad sense of humor, but it didn't sit right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know of my coming and going and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off of work because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or his bedroom. Other days he would play very loud music that bumped through the whole house. Sometimes he would even play NPR talk radio at those volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about sex workers saying, "You can do whatever you want, you can choke them or beat them to death and nobody cares." I took exception to this. I told him I thought that was messed up. But when he would get tweaking, he'd always come back around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about how he was a normal white guy who owned a house and had a good career, so the police would never suspect him. At this point, I start to think that it has gone too far to simply be a joke. I was in a weird position because money was tight at the time and my options were few. I tried to convince myself that even if he is messed up, he is probably just engaging in outward fantasies. I knew that he would acquire the services of sex workers on occasion, but again did not judge that activity at face value, but started becoming concerned. Then at one point when I was doing laundry, I caught whiffs of decomposition. The house we were in was in southeast Portland. It was relatively new, having grown up in upstate NY. I know that animals can be trapped in walls and die, but this was the garage, and there was no animals scurrying in the walls. This was strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what I would do, and decided I would confront him about the smell. I decided to pose the question in a somewhat suggestive way by expanding on his jokes. I told him that he needs to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smelled decomposition from the garage. I will never forget his reaction. His eyes widened and he shot me a sharp glare, somewhere between fear and anger. He stumbled over his words and eventually responded, "What, really?" I said, "Yes, really," and there was a few seconds of awkwardness before he said, "Thanks for letting me know," and promptly went into his bedroom and shut the door. A few days after that, he went into the upper crawl space in the garage while I was again doing laundry. He called for me and was trying to convince me to come up into the crawl space. My body locked up and it was like my instincts were screaming at me that if I went up there I would not come back down. I gave some excuse that I can sparsely remember that I had to be someplace, packed up my laundry, threw it in my room, and left. He spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob. The only way in was through the backyard. I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect, to either confirm or dismiss the suspicions once and for all. In the last couple months I had lived there, I was privy to more graphic comments about women and sex workers, explicit talk of sexual violence, and he was using more and more. He once showed me a video he made. He is a graphic designer and artist as well, which featured heavy bondage themes interspersed with distorted audio of women screaming and this strange leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of these things alone may be innocuous, but as they accumulated, it became suspicious to me. It was October of 2016 that I left there, taking off to Oseti Oyate camp during the anti-pipeline protests with Standing Rock, Lakota. A mix of feeling called to action and having nothing to lose as I wanted to get out of that house in the worst way. My last night there, I did not give notice that I was leaving. He was drinking and tweaking again. Started in on the same conversation, loosely describing murder and sexual violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. I told him he would be caught eventually, not even holding back my suspicion anymore. He reiterated that he was the last person police would suspect, and asserted that they wouldn't catch him. He said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense he had been using before. I left the next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year and a half. I felt as though I hadn't done anything. The guilt was eating away at me, so I called Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip describing what I had described here. When I did, the operator started going back and forth, putting me on hold because the call had piqued the interest of the police sergeant who was assigned to the call center. So they were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, his house, the methods he described, etc. It seemed like they took interest. I gave them as much information as I could remember and left it at that, feeling just a little better that I had at least tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times, I told my mother about all of this and she became interested, asking what house this was, and she ended up pulling it up on G-Maps. She put up the street view, and I noticed that there was a large enclosed trailer in the driveway that wasn't there when I was. I could theorize why it might have been there, but cannot put together a practical reason for it, or why he'd be using it, unless he was moving or using it to haul things to discard. Admittedly, that is pure conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder. I doubt that I will get closure, or have my suspicions validated unless he does finally get caught and arrested and I read about it. I have grown up poor and been around the lowlife a lot. I have interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my time, but none of them have ever made the impression that Mike made on me. Make of it what you will, but I hope I never meet him again. Worst neighbor ever. Last year, after a blissful first year of living in a new apartment all on my own for the first time, a man moved in next door that I will never forget. The layout of the apartment is crucial to understanding this incident, so I made a little diagram, floor plan taken from the closest thing I could find online and edited. The most important part is that my balcony and his balcony are only partially separated by a wall. There is a solid 2-foot gap in which you can easily walk from one to the other. For context, I previously had a very lovely woman living next door for the entire first year I lived there, who never crossed this balcony threshold without being explicitly invited. I only throw this in there so you can understand I wasn't previously concerned about someone infiltrating my space. The first time I met this new neighbor, he was unloading groceries from his massive truck into the assigned parking spot next to mine. As I was driving up, he and a girl I assumed to be his girlfriend were unloading boxes from Costco. I noticed them speaking, and as soon as I was out of the car, they went silent. I nodded to them, proceeded to the elevator, and the guy ran up behind me, threw some boxes down, and begged me to wait. No problem, I'm a good neighbor. While in the elevator, the girlfriend refused to make eye contact or speak to me. A little weird, but I just thought she was shy. But he quickly introduced himself and was extremely chatty. In the 45 seconds it takes to get to the floor where our apartments were, he asked how I liked the place, where I was from, and where I worked. Looking back, his enthusiasm was a little strange, but I chalked it up to him being excited to be in a new place. For the sake of the rest of this story, let's call him Sam. Sam was maybe 33, 6'15" tall, with a slim, muscular build and had hair buzzed extremely short, as if to mask his balding. Pretty average looking by all accounts. The first few weeks we run into each other often, and he always makes small talk, and always refers to me as Miss. I assume it's because he forgot my name but wanted to be polite. I almost never see his girlfriend after the first night, but occasionally I can hear him talking to a lady in his apartment as the walls are reasonably thin. One night, about 3 months after Sam moved in, my boyfriend is spending the night and we were watching movies on the couch. It's maybe 11:30 p.m. The back of my couch is against the wall I share with Sam, and we hear some banging noises. My first thought is that him and his girlfriend must be getting it on. Boyfriend and I laugh and turn the volume up a bit to drown them out. Then, in addition to the banging, the neighbors begin screaming. We can hear objects being thrown, glass shattering. The words are muffled, but there is distinctively anger and crying going on. My boyfriend, gem that he is, steps onto the semi-shared balcony and in his loudest voice yells over, without crossing onto Sam's balcony, "Everything okay in there?" The girl opens the sliding glass door on Sam's side a minute or two later and says, "Sorry about that," so we leave it alone. I'm concerned, but we have no idea what actually happened and decide to go to bed. Big mistake, I know. I wake up around 3 a.m. to more screaming, but my boyfriend refuses to wake up, and I'm not about to take my 5-foot self to break up whatever is going on at 3 a.m. I considered calling police, but was so drowsy I convinced myself I dreamed it. I deeply regret that decision. The next morning I woke up to some terrible personal news, an entirely unrelated death of a friend, and pretty much put the events of that night on the back burner. I didn't forget, but it also wasn't on my mind. Fast forward about 2 weeks. It's a warm day and I'm outside reading a book in a robe, sorts bra and shorts. I'm in a chair that faces away from Sam's apartment, so I can't see his side from where I am. I'm deep in my book when suddenly I get tapped on the shoulder. Sam is standing behind me and asks if we can talk for a second. This man has already crossed an, albeit invisible, line by coming on my side of the balcony. But I also can't get to my door without physically moving him aside, so I ask him what's going on. He told me it was his birthday and asked if I knew where to get weed because I seemed like a girl who knows how to have a good time. As we live in a state where weed is legal, I told him that I'm sure Google would provide the best dispensary in the area, but I personally didn't have any. He proceeds to tell me how drunk he got last night, and at this point I am itching for an exit. As I start to move as if to signal I'm done talking, he reaches out for my shoulder and tells me he scratched my car last night because he was driving very, very wasted. Remember his massive truck? He says all of this with a smile on his face, almost laughing. I'm surprised, but mostly want to get away from him because my creep senses are starting to tingle and I don't want to blow up at him for hitting my car. He says he'll send me his insurance info if I give him my number, and thankfully I knew that would be a bad call. I make a bad nervous joke about knowing where he lived and said if the damage was bad enough, I would knock on his door to get his insurance. He counters by saying he will leave a note with his info on my door. He retreats from my balcony while also saying he'd prefer to just pay me cash and not involve insurance. I give it an hour or so and then I head down to assess the damage. I did this because I didn't want to walk down at the same time as him, risk having him follow me. Sure enough, there are 2 long new scratches on the driver's door. They're not deep, just kind of superficial or worthy of a call to insurance immediately. I really just didn't want to get involved with him in any way, so I decided I could deal with the scratches. But this little event has kind of shaken me. At this point, I knew something was off with him. Nothing unusual happens as far as I'm aware this night. The next day is a Saturday, and as I head to work the next day I am home alone watching some action movie and it's around 11 p.m. I'm on the sofa with my cat curled up on me, and the movie is relatively loud, so it takes me a little while to register this banging noise coming from the hallway of my apartment building. I honestly only noticed because my cat had woken up and got all puffed up and freaked out. I turn down the volume of the film and suddenly the banging is getting louder and louder. And just as I stand up, I hear the 5 words no one wants to hear coming from their door. "Open up, it's the police." My stomach dropped to the floor. I had lied to Sam the day before I totally had weed, and I had smoked a joint outside on the balcony, the part farthest away from Sam's, maybe 20 minutes before. I'm totally panicked and trying to control my breathing so I don't immediately come off as suspicious before I answer the door. I remember checking the peephole to see a close-up of a cop's face and then opening the door. coming face to face with 6 officers, all with guns drawn. I'm about 5 seconds away from completely pissing my pants in fear, still convinced I'm somehow in trouble for smoking a joint. The officer who seems to be in charge can instantly sense the level of my panic, and he says, "Ma'am, you're not in trouble. We need to speak with you about your neighbor. Can we come in?" At this point, I'm reeling and my whole being is tense. I let the cops in, but my heart hasn't moved from my throat. The lead policeman asks me about any interactions with Sam. I tell them I barely know him, that he just lives next to me, only moved in a few months ago. I ask why they needed to be in my apartment. I'm scared, but also I don't always trust cops, and I have the right to know why 6 of them practically waved their guns in my face. He proceeds to tell me that Sam is a bad guy. He apparently beat his girlfriend so badly the night prior that she was now in the ICU for her injuries. The cops also told me Sam's girlfriend said she believed he had a gun, and that he was currently using something to barricade himself in the apartment next to mine. Lead officer says he has spoken to my building manager and knew my place had access to his balcony, and they needed to use it to arrest him. I'm probably visibly shaking at this point as fear courses through me. Next, they asked me to go into my bedroom and lock the doors, turn the lights off. The next 45 minutes were absolute hell. In my panic, I had left my cell phone on my kitchen counter and had to sit in my room just listening to the commotion. No shots were ever fired, but there was a lot of yelling and what sounded like things being thrown. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, the main officer knocked on my door and told me that Sam had been arrested, and thanked me for letting them use my apartment. They asked me questions for maybe 15 more minutes and left. I wish this is where the story ended, but there is a bit more. In the days following Sam's arrest, I became even more panicked about him coming back to the apartment building, worried about retaliation. I hadn't said anything to the police to technically incriminate him. I had proof of nothing except his word that he was the one who scratched my car. But I did tell them about the night my boyfriend and I heard them fight. About 5 days later, Sam reappeared at the building as I was coming home from work one evening. He tried to approach me, but the elevator shut just as he was running to catch it. My whole body got tense, like the feeling when you come this close to getting in a car accident but narrowly avoid it. I stayed off my balcony entirely from this point and always kept the curtains closed. We didn't speak or really see each other at all for another few weeks, and then had our final interaction. Sam stopped me in the parking lot one night, running after me as I was about to get on the elevator. He begged me to tell him why I let the cops in that night. I told him the honest truth, that I was stoned, didn't know what to do, and had a bad history with cops. This is all true, and again I was concerned about him trying to retaliate. He then got pretty upset and kept trying to repeat the question, obviously wanting a different answer. When I couldn't give him one, he then offered me $3,000 to testify as a character witness on his behalf, because I knew him and knew how he really treated women. I was speechless and very freaked out. He told me his hearing was the next Thursday morning, and he asked if I could show up. I was like a deer frozen in headlights for a moment, and then somehow got the hell out of there after mumbling a string of words that were most likely incoherent. The Wednesday night before this trial, I came home from work and my cat was acting kind of weird, like something had just spooked her and her tail was puffed out. I kind of shook it off, but I noticed through the curtains there was something taped to the outside of my sliding glass door. Apparently Sam had left a post with his phone number and name, and underneath, "I am counting on you." Needless to say, I never showed up. I took a photo of the post, grabbed my cat, locked all my doors, and stayed at my mom's house for about 5 days after that happened. I did phone the police to let them know he had been on my balcony again, but they never followed up with anything. Eventually, my boyfriend came and we went back to my place together. Everything was as it should have been. I never saw Sam again, but a few weeks later, a lady I had never seen before was cleaning out his apartment. Maybe a month after that, new people moved in, and things have been normal ever since. I tried calling the police and the county jail to see if he was in lockup again, but no one was able to release information to me. I'm hoping that means he's there, if he did what the police said he did. So to Sam, I will say, I'm not really sure what happened, but my biggest regret is not calling the police when I felt like I should have in my gut. Let's never meet again. Update. A comment made me realize I left out something really important. Before the new people moved in, I ran into my building manager and had a chat with him about Sam. In an attempt to discover if Sam had been evicted, if he went to jail, the manager disclosed the girlfriend did pull through. I never knew her name, so I couldn't follow up with trying to see if she was okay with local hospitals. The manager did tell me Sam was made an exception to break his lease, but he couldn't confirm whether or not he was in jail. Also, per a commenter, I looked up my county's inmate list and can't find his name, but I'm not sure if the name he gave me was his legal name or just what he went by. I don't have much else to go off of, sadly. Man tried to grab my baby from me on flight. I've flown with my 1-year-old solo nearly a dozen times. Usually people are understanding and kind about me having a baby on my lap, and overall he's a happy, easy baby. He's also very cute, so it's not uncommon for strangers to talk to him. Usually I don't mind. The last trip I took, I sat alone in my aisle, with a man sitting by himself directly behind me. My baby was tired and fussing. I knew he was tired, but there's not a lot I could do until after we took off. Right out the gate, the man behind was talking to my baby, saying, "Oh, hi, baby, why sad baby, cute, cute baby." I smiled and replied that he was tired. Sorry for the fuss, thank you. After takeoff, I started to get him settled for a nap. The man behind us continued to talk to my baby, putting his hand through the seats to try and grab his feet. Multiple times I asked him nicely to please stop. My baby was tired, you're distracting him, he just needs a nap. Finally, I set my baby down next to me. He stood on the floor facing the seat next to me so that I could make a bottle. The man behind me stood up and reached over my seat to pick him up. I immediately leaned forward to pick up my baby, saying, "No thank you, I don't need help, please no thank you." The man pushed me back into my seat while mumbling, "Sweet baby, why baby cry?" I replied very loudly no and quickly picked up my baby. I thought that was the end of that. I was wrong. I tried to rock my baby to sleep while desperately trying not to lose my cool. As I'm rocking baby, the man behind me reached through our seats to grab my arm, saying, no rocking, you make him cry." I pulled free from him and yelled, "Do not touch me." Again, I thought that'd be the end. I started rocking baby for a second time. This time, the man behind me reached both hands around either side of my seat to hold me in place, saying, No rocking, stop rocking." I am somewhat embarrassed that I completely lost it. Clutching my baby to my chest while struggling to get free of him, it hurt. I hit the call light while screaming, "Let me go, do not touch me, let me go, let me go, let me go." He was still holding me by my arms when the flight attendants came running. I could barely get anything out to the flight attendants. Everyone around us was staring, I was sobbing, and all I could get out was that I could not sit there anymore and for the love of God, please move me. The man behind me tried to move with me, but I told the flight attendants that I did not know him and he could not come with me. I had a good cry in my new seat, but my baby immediately went to sleep. I was moved to be next to the flight attendant seats. After calming down, I explained to the flight attendants what had happened. Multiple times, the man that had been behind me got up to try to come back to my new seat, only to be turned around by one of the flight attendants. Towards the end of the flight, one of the flight attendants told me that they'd explained everything to the pilot, and the pilot had called the FBI and local police to escort the man off the flight. I would also be escorted off, as well as everyone around us that had watched everything happen. He cheered as he was escorted off. I had to interview with the FBI and nearly missed my next flight. After my trip was done, I had to fly back going through the same airport. It was stressful and emotional, to say the least, even knowing that he was banned from the airline and the airport. I haven't flown since. To the man that tried to grab my baby from me and then wouldn't let go of me, let's never fucking meet again. I escaped an intruder by playing along. I escaped a man who broke into my home who had been stalking me for months. In 2014, I moved to England from Canada to gain work and travel experience and also to find myself. I ended up living in Essex with 3 other roommates. They were all women. all a bit older than I was. I was 24 at the time. Megan was 31, Cherry was 34, and Cassie was 38. Megan was from New York, Cherry from New Jersey, and Cassie from Poland. All four of us shared this 3-story flat. The back of our home was the living room and kitchen. The back wall was complete glass that looked out into the garden. The garden was completely fenced in. The house had an interesting dynamic, to say the least. Tons of stories from that time in my life. I adored all my roommates except for Cherry. After living with Cherry for 7 months, I was over her antics. One day I come home from work. I lock the door, make myself something to eat, and go up to bed. I brought some work home with me, so I am in my nightie with all these papers around me and my headphones on, jamming out. I had headphones on because Cherry was out to dinner with work friends. That meant booze, and then soon after that a tantrum was surely to come. I just didn't want to have to listen to her crazy scream crying. I am working away, completely focused, until I feel something. I look up to see a man standing over me. I don't register it right away and passively say, "Cherry's room in on the 2nd floor," and continue to work. Cherry regularly brought strange men home. He doesn't leave. Again, "Cherry's room is downstairs, you..." He then interrupts. I am not here for Cherry. A cold chill iced my veins. My fight or flight kicked in just then. I start surveying the situation. I look him up and down. He has a bottle of Prosecco in one hand and a knife in the other. He is about 5'10", wild muddy brown hair and black eyes. He has a light blue polo shirt on and one side of his collar is popped up and a distinct Manchester accent. Once I focused in, I realized his eyes were black because his pupils were completely dilated. Shit, I was in trouble. I needed an escape plan. Unfortunately, this man was standing in between me and my bedroom door. I needed to get downstairs, but I needed for him to think it was his idea. I decided to play along. Just then he uses his knife to pop the cork, Prosecco starting flowing onto my carpet. I said, "Oh no, let's clean that up. I prefer to drink out of a proper flute anyways." He nodded, replying, "Yeah, you're a proper classy bird, let's go." I try to act as natural as possible. I try not to show that I am shaking all over and try to gain control over my breathing. We take the long journey down to the main floor of my flat. All 3 floors. He has the back of my nightie bunched up in one hand and I could feel the point of the knife graze my back with his other. I was trying to playfully speak with him as we walked down the stairs. I couldn't tell you what I was saying. I was most likely rambling. I couldn't hear anything over my heart beating in my ears. We get to the bottom of the stairs and there is a hallway to my left that leads to the front door. On my right, which is much closer to us, is the kitchen and living room. We make our way into the kitchen. I point to the cabinets that had the wine glasses. He said he knew where they were and start towards them. I now had the kitchen table in between us. It was time to run. I burst into a sprint down the hallway towards the door. My hands fumble over the locks, shaking and sweating. I swing open the door and see 2 men walking across the street. They must have been walking home from the train. There was a big train station in front of our home. I call out to them for help and suddenly I am flung onto the ground. Little pebbles piercing my skin sent sharp pains where they jabbed. The intruder pushed me out of the way to run and escape. One of the men chased after the intruder, while the other said for me to go inside while he surveyed my home and to call the police. I locked the doors and I called the police. While I am on the phone with dispatch, I manically run around the house to double-check all the windows and doors. Suddenly, I hear a loud bang on my door. I inform the dispatch of the banging and she informs me that police weren't there yet. I thought it might be one of the gentlemen who helped me. I go to look out the eye hole and it's him. The intruder. He came back. He's banging on my door screaming that I had his glasses and that he was not done with me. I absolutely freak out. The dispatcher attempts to calm me down, but I am losing my ever-loving mind. She then said, "They are pulling onto your street now, you should hear their sirens." I did. Thank God. The intruder then blasts off. One officer jumps out of the passenger side while the car is still moving and chases after him. The second officer comes into my home, interviews me and the 2 gentlemen, collects evidence, takes photos. After some time of him being there, Cherry comes home and freaks out. Once the situation was explained to her, she said, "Oh my God, that could have been me." "Yeah, thanks, Cherry. It's all about you." The next morning, I am called in to identify a man they had in custody. I pointed him out. I go into a little room and the officer pulls out an evidence bag. He asked me if the items were mine. There were my underwear and photos taken from my home. The officer informed me that the intruder had been stalking me for some time now. He estimates 3 months. He had made a nest outside our home on top of a hill that overlooked into our living room and kitchen. He is a known sex offender and drug dealer. He then told me how lucky I was to get out practically unharmed. Others weren't so lucky. To the man who stalked me and broke into my home, let's not meet again. However, I would love to run into those two gentlemen again. Every day I am thankful for them.